Well, hello, and welcome back to this episode 3 of the Tokyo Trauma Talks. I'm Sarah Furuya from Sarah Furuya Coaching. I've been coaching for 20 years, and this topic of trauma is so interesting to me, especially with the background in psychology and biology. I also welcome today Mary Stanley, who is currently studying for a degree in human services in the US with a minor in trauma. So she'll be talking a lot to us about that today. We also welcome María Paula Farfán, who is a trauma-informed facilitator who's been involved in the Prison Compassion Project. And also Paula Esguerra, who is a meditation and yoga teacher who works for All Here, a meditation monitoring project, which is absolutely fantastic as well. So welcome, everybody.
Hi, Sarah.
Nice to see you. Okay, so I'd just like to cue up what we're talking about today for our listeners. I hope you enjoyed episodes 1 and 2. If you haven't listened to them yet, do go back and have a listen to those. So today we're talking about working with trauma, the body, the mind, and the system. We're going to have a look at how we work with trauma and a little bit more background about prison projects, some social work stuff. We're going to talk about mindfulness and meditation and some somatic practices from Paula. We may touch also on something about brain injury, because a lot of the background of trauma comes from brain injury and the things that come from that. And then the miracle of survival, how the body protects us. And then we'll again ask Paula to give us a nice compassionate close so we can ground ourselves in. During these sessions, we allow space to open up, and we're not cutting that out because we want to allow that space to open up in the same way that we all work in the world as usually. All right. I'm just going to do a quick definition of trauma for us. In the National Institutes of Health, trauma is defined as a tissue injury that occurs more or less suddenly due to violence or accident and is accountable for initiating other things that happen following that. And the American Psychological Association says trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, crime, or natural disaster. Reactions such as shock and denial are typical. We all work with trauma in different ways. It's always present during sessions for me, including my own. So I'm constantly got an eye on that. I don't identify as trauma informed yet, but I would say I'm kind of aware that it's part of one of the things that's inside the system when I'm doing systems coaching personally. So what I'd like to do today then is, first of all, hand this over to Mary to give us a little bit of an overview from what she's learning at the moment.
So part of my degree is actually in trauma and resilience, which I like how they're paired together, because I think sometimes when we look at just trauma itself, sometimes feels like something we can't overcome. But I think trauma being coupled with kind of this resilience factor with what everyone here does, it's like you talk to people about trauma, it's trauma-informed care, you're building that resilience. So I love that it's taught together in that way. When people ask me about it, I always say like that trauma and resilience are sisters born of the same experience. That kind of helps me reframe and not feel like when we are talking about such deep, personal, life-altering events, that it does feel like we can have resilience towards this. There can be another side of it that we come out of and reflect upon our experiences, and not necessarily a positive way, but in a way of growth. Another thing that I've been exploring a lot with my education is CTEs. CTEs is like the buildup of traumatic brain injuries, and how with a protein in the brain, it induces memory loss, aggression, impulsivity. So that's a lot of what we're studying, the ACEs. So the adverse childhood experiences. So I would really like to hear more from her and how she sees that play out with trauma, because she is working with people that are able to maybe possibly be more vulnerable, especially like watching the video from the Compassion Prison Project. So I'm really curious about like how you see trauma played out. What I saw in the video is mostly male prison. So it's like a hyper masculine state. So how you see someone be able to kind of shed that to talk about these experiences and be raw. So I would like for you to explain that a little bit and what you do.
Thank you, Mary. There's a lot of things to share here, like about that. And first, I would like to bring what Sarah was introducing this episode, the 3 E's. that those are event, then experience, and then the effects. Bringing this because trauma at the very end is something very personal that you experience. As we talked in the last episodes, we can have the same event, but for each of us, our experience is different. And that is something that you can really find out sharing this with people in prison. When we are talking about this, you can see that they can relate to each other about the experiences that they have living or they had in their childhood. So that's something very encouraging for all of us because, as we say in trauma, trauma separates us, separates from ourselves and from others. And so when you start talking about trauma, about your trauma that brings us together, as we are doing here, when you understand that that doesn't happen just to you, and so many other people have experienced that same, well, not that same, but those events, then you feel like, I'm not alone with this. And that's when community really have an amazing and a very important role for healing. Because then you say like, okay, I'm going through this whole time. But then my neighbor, Mary, she's gone through that as well. So the video that you have watched took place in the US with men, but I've been working with women as well. Of course, we share so many traumas, men and women, but there are so a specific one for women and then for men. But when you start talking, when you find the courage to share and your trauma, and simultaneously you start the guilt and shame start fading out, then you can feel all these moving forward, your healing moving forward. So when we do these compassion circles in prison, then you are a facilitator. You are not teaching them anything. You're part of them because we are all equals. We have had so many experiences in terms of feeling neglected, for example, or childhood. Probably they felt neglected because they were abandoned, probably, but probably people that have had some other opportunities felt neglected because their parents went to work every single day and they haven't had the time to share with them when they got back from school, for example. But the main thing is that we all have had those experiences. We all have that pain, those emotions. And so having these emotions and feeling like separated from ourselves is because trauma is so painful that we really want to take, like that distance to not feeling that pain anymore. Coming back again to our bodies. Coming back to our bodies, it's hard because then you're going to feel that pain again. But the only way to heal that pain is going through it. You can run very fast from that pain, but that pain is going to get you. When we do this work in prisons, like becoming people being trauma aware, it's very important for them to understand that their personalities, their reactions is not who they are. It's a result from being traumatized. And when you can name what you're feeling or what you're going through, then you can really work on it. When you understand that your rage is a result from your trauma, then you can go like, okay, so I have to understand where the root of this is, where this is coming from. And from that, I can take over and choose to be or react or respond different.
And one of the things that we've been learning is that, and I like when you said like you have to go through it. That's the only way, is because if you don't, what I've been learning and like my studies is if you're not going to process it, your body is going to try to. And that's where they're starting to link now, like people who've had trauma with autoimmune diseases, all this kind of stuff. If you're not processing it, rudimentary way of saying it is like your body is going to try to process out that. So you see people who have autoimmune diseases have very high trauma scores, or you look at people, what I've kind of been learning about ACEs. I mean, I know you work with that face to face, and I'm just like in books, where the higher their ACE score is, the effects that they have increased risk of cancer and heart disease and diabetes. If you personally can't go through it and process the emotions and talk about it, your body is going to try to do that. When you said that, I was like, that's exactly what it is. If you don't go through it, you're going to be forced to, I think, almost in a way. The Compassion Prison Project is so great because you get to see all these people, all these men, because it's in, like you said, in the men's prison. And every time they talk about childhood trauma and everyone takes a step in, what you said, it's like what happened to you is now defining who you are because you've had these effects from it. What they're finding is the higher of your ACE score, so I believe it's 4 or more, that's when you're showing the risk of diabetes, strokes, or heart disease and cancers. So the higher it is, it kind of is indicative of how you kind of are present yourself to the world in a lot of ways. So I'm sure that that's definitely not the best definition for it. That's like the textbook definition and not like the real world. So it's very interesting how these things from an early childhood, those are your building blocks.
That term coined late in the 90s, 1998, after a study that Robert Anda and Felitti from the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, they did a study with 70,000 people or so about like obesity. They were, like trying all these things of diets and doing exercise and changing habits, but they didn't had any good results. Going a little bit back with people and understanding what they've been going through. And so they found out that people, mainly women, had this disorder because they were trying to hide from their pain they went through when they were abused. These 2 doctors started going deeper on what had happened to these people. And so they found out like 10 experiences. And that's the original questionnaire of the ACEs. And so they are like in 3 different categories that are abuse, neglect, and dysfunctional household experiences. It could be like having a relative in prison or your parents getting divorced. And all this happened from 0 to 18 years. And so that's what Mary was saying, that when you have experienced any of these events from your 0 to 18, that probably can have or give you like greater probabilities for you to have cancer, for you to go to prison, for you to have a life expectancy lower than the average, for having diabetes, I mean, you name it. So, yes, I just wanted to add that to what Mary was saying.
Bringing so much texture in this background and history. And before I hand over to Paula to bring her expertise in here, I wanted to just, because this is what she works with for sure, is the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. So as a result of these ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences, sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system will be affected, I believe. The sympathetic nervous system is that fight, flight, freeze, and one that has been more recently added in is fawn. So that like super people pleasing, or even like rebellion is as a way of fawning as well. So just that kind of trying to fit yourself into the surroundings to try and manage your sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system, we can call it fight or flight system. And the activation is the increased heart rate and blood pressure. So if something happens and then your heart rate goes up or the adrenaline comes in, dilation of pupils, dilation of the bronchi, the lungs to increase the oxygen intake, blood redirected away from the digestive system towards the muscles, stimulation of the adrenal glands to release the stress hormones like epinephrine, adrenaline, and inhibition of digestion and saliva production. With this in mind, it has a really strong physiological impact on you. and how you can regulate. And then the parasympathetic nervous system is the place we want to go, which is the rest and digest. And this is where Paula's work really comes into its own. So it's that decreased heart rate and blood pressure, pupils go down again, you can breathe more easily, and everything else just comes in, all the things that I was talking about before there. I just wonder then, Paula, how you kind of help people in these situations when that's starting to happen. I know I have techniques that I use during coaching sessions, but how about you?
So I guess also to tie it to what we've been talking about, most of the work that we do through contemplative practices, of course, has to do with the body. But personally, and not just me, but I think that this division between body and mind is somewhat arbitrary. For example, in Japanese, of course, we use the word kokoro, and it includes both. There are other languages in which body and mind are the same. But when we speak, for example, about the three E's, the event, of course, is not something we can change after a few years or whatever, right? But of course, the experience, which Maria Paula said, like it's our interpretation of that event. We can work on that, right? And the effects, of course, most of them would be stored in the body, but also in the mind in terms of beliefs, self-talk, and so on. And this also we can work on. So I would say that the use of contemplative practices would be a way to address both of this. We will access that kind of circle of trauma. We have two gates. We can use those practices to understand the experience on a different light. For example, we were talking about neglect, to understand, okay, well, my parents were not there for me, maybe, but they were working, which to them was the way in which they were there for me, for example. We can work on those interpretations, but then even if we understand those things, the traumatic experience is still stored in our bodies. We mentioned briefly on last episode, by engaging in these practices, we can activate those memories and we can also process those memories. And to link it back to what Mary was saying and Maria Paula was saying, is we can go through the experience. So often my sense, and again, I'm not a specialist in this topic, but my sense is that trauma almost puts us in a situation where we have that experience frozen in us. We have feelings that were not felt or that were felt too much, were so overwhelming that we couldn't really process the experience fully. Or even sometimes we did feel it, but we couldn't express it. We couldn't share it. There was nobody around to contain us and to give us that space to share it. So my sense is that sometimes when we engage in these compassion circles, even in yoga or meditation, we allow ourselves to both reinterpret, but also to go through those experiences at a pace that is more digestible than that overwhelming situation that happened in the past. It's not always the case. Sometimes these experiences come out and are overwhelming also in the present. But as we work together with the mind and the body, we can find new meaning and we can allow ourselves time and space to digest the experiences that often were just too overpowering for us to digest in the past.
Beautiful, Paula. Thank you. Absolutely beautiful. So I want to add a little bit of some of the techniques for me recognizing in my coaching practice that I use. So with the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, I'm always on the lookout for that. Like if fawn comes into the room, especially, basically people look well, but actually there's something going on there where they either want to please me or please somebody else, or that what they're saying isn't quite matching what I'm seeing, these kinds of things. So then I have ways to deal with that. So 3 ways that I'll just say, and we can talk about this in session 4 as well. I'll give a little bit more information. But what I have to recognize is if somebody's been thrown over an edge too fast during the coaching session, they've suddenly come to a realization and they've gone over the edge too fast and their trauma or something has been stimulated and activated, then they will drop into a place called realm because their sympathetic nervous system has been activated. and they're full of adrenaline. And then, of course, your field of vision just goes like that. If a dog's attacking you, you need to be focused entirely on it and not all the things around. And that happens in coaching sessions as well. So I need to recognize that. We call that place realm, and I will educate and then just recognize, I think that maybe we're in realm. And oftentimes I'll already have educated people on that. And realm is triggered by what we call emotional flooding. So people completely emotionally flooded, and then it's not uncoachable at that point. Because coaching is not therapy, I don't go to that place. I just note that this is happening in the room. And then the third thing that has often come up for me is, and I guess this is trauma and PTSD as well, is if active addictions present. So it's not that person, but it's present in their systems or previously in their current life, then I am always aware of that. And if the door opens for me to note, I think you may be living with active addiction, in which case I include that in the system. Is that okay with you? Because I want to be sure that that's acknowledged. Then at least we can start moving forward with the coaching. Because again, that's not my business to deal with that. It's just my business to understand it's impacting their moving forward or their coachability or what's actually happening in their systems. So there we go. That's a few bits and pieces to chew on there from my coaching world. So who would like to pick up from here?
Me. listening to Paula just pop up in my mind to share with you what we're doing here in Argentina, because we're doing here, carrying out the program from Compassion Prison Project that calls Trauma Talks as well. And so we're doing it with yoga. First, we do like warm up with yoga. Then we have the workshop. And then we end the session with yoga, interpersonal yoga. And so that's been so powerful for them after learning and understanding all this information, doing some reflections upon their life and everything, and sharing, having this moment, like a body time moment, to share with another person. In terms of stretching, for example, when you do that with another person, it's easier. When you feel held, somebody's holding you there, you can just surrender. And that happens with the body and that happens with the mind. When we start our compassion circles, we start in like doing a check-in. So please say your name, how you're feeling right now, and then you say, I'm check-in. People say like, I'm feeling okay, I'm feeling blessed, I'm feeling gratitude, or I'm feeling sad, distressed. And so for them to see all these people around the circle, holding them, is like, okay, you're feeling, thank you, and we can help you with that. We're here for you to give a space to that feeling and feel that feeling, like giving yourself permission to feel that feeling. And that's been super transformative to really accompanying all this information, practices like yoga, nailing it by mind and body. I just want to share with you that is just not like a matter of, you wish say the longest journey you take is from here to here. It's not like a matter of just being like trauma informed. It's just like embody that information, integrate that information, and live from that information.
Embody, integrate, and live from that information. That's absolutely amazing. And it could be a good way to move into the next topic, the miracle of survival, how the body protects us. What do you notice about that? How does the body protect us? How does that come through in the Prison Compassion Project or in terms of Paula's work in the world?
Yes, I mean, I have so much to say about this, but it seems to me that, this ability of the body to protect us, actually, we could even look at it in two ways, right? Like one is short term, whereas when all of these physiological responses that you've been mentioning come into play. Of course, for example, the blood goes to our limbs so that we can run faster and escape. Our eyes, our field of vision narrows so that we can focus. All of this seems to me that comes into play in the moment when something happens. But sometimes part of the issue I see with trauma is that these responses that are meant for the body to be used temporarily become used long term. And that's when our body gets damaged, if you want to call it that way, right? Like, so we have all these excess stress hormones running in the body just by living in the city, by hearing the train, by running around, by getting notifications, all these things. So that is part of that continuous alert and continuous stress is what I think long-term damages the body. But also, it seems to me that when we talk about this topic of trauma and the topic of resilience also, it's very important, because I think that when we start cultivating resilience, that is when we also tap into the body and the mind long-term protection for us. I haven't quite formulated this in a perfect way, but my sense, and this came, a few years ago, I had a big project in South Africa, and I had the luck of meeting Justice Albie Sachs. So he was part of the South African freedom fighting movement, and he was very active in that. They tried to kill him by putting a bomb in his car. Anyway, he goes to the car explodes, and then he thought he's dead, and he's laying under the car thinking, I'm dead. These lights are coming from the other world, whatever, right? And then he's taken to the hospital, he's unconscious, blah, 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 blah. When he comes back to consciousness, they say to him, well, we have bad news. You've lost an arm. And he thinks, I'm alive. I just lost an arm. And I couldn't believe that this was somebody's reaction to such a traumatic event. And then that whole experience that he had, that of course we would all agree that was traumatic, right? To have a bomb put in your car and have it blown away, became the source of a lot of his wisdom and a lot of what his whole process of forgiving and how he recovered from that. And he has a beautiful book called The Soft Revenge of a Freedom Fighter, where it's about forgiveness. After speaking with Albie and just putting all these pieces together, my sense is that we can mine our traumatic experiences and they can become our mission, our purpose. And they can also become a way in long term that our body actually becomes strong, because we realize that we have a role to play, that we are important, and actually that healing and taking care of our bodies is important so that we can live a full life. So then there's another protection mechanism that the body starts developing as we go into resilience. And it's a journey. I think that is one of the funnest journeys that we can undertake. Regarding your question, Mary, about people open up, it's very personal. My yoga teacher, Mark Whitwell, he has this beautiful saying, which is, the yoga teacher is not more than a friend and not less than a friend, meaning that there is no hierarchy and that you are not a complete yoga teacher if you're not able to hold a safe space where people can open up in friendship and trust. So part of the training to become a yoga teacher and to become a yoga student and to become a yogi or a yogini is becoming able to have these deeper connections and these deeper relationships that when we practice and these emotions and experiences come out, we are able to respect them as a group and we are able to digest them and hold space for each other. And that becomes a very important link between us, that shared experience of healing and coming back to ourselves again and again.
Wow. Gorgeous, 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 gorgeous. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We've had a really good look just now at working with trauma, the body, the mind, and the system there. And we're going to move into something about holding space, healing treatment, and what comes next. And our takeaway from this one was healing is not about erasing trauma, but honoring ways in which we've survived and pulling together the community. And I think what Maria Paula said about love and feeling that love really helps us to kind of shift these things inside our body. Practitioners like Paula can do that. And having people like Mary in the social services also helps that a great deal too. So thank you very much for listening. This is the end of session 3, and we'll be back for session 4 next week. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.